The sun hung low over the savannah, casting long shadows across the dusty clearing where the great baobab tree rose like a guardian of generations. Beneath its sprawling branches, the village council had gathered, their voices clashing like spears in battle. The elders sat in a circle, their faces weathered by time and worry, while the villagers pressed closer on the edges, listening, waiting, hoping for a solution. The old well, the heart of the village, was failing. Its water, once sweet and abundant, had grown shallow and bitter. Women stood nearby with empty clay pots balanced on their heads, their eyes heavy with concern. Children lingered at their mothers' skirts, peeking at the council with curiosity, sensing the tension though too young to grasp its weight. The arguments rose and fell like a storm. One elder insisted the neighboring clan had cursed the water. Another claimed that sacrifices must be made at the river shrine. A third argued that the younger men should walk farther to fetch water from a distant spring, though the journey was dangerous and long. Their words tangled together, and no answer came. The air was thick with frustration, and the villagers shifted uneasily, knowing that without water, their crops would wither and their lives would grow harder still. From the edge of the crowd, a voice rose, small, trembling at first, but steady enough to cut through the noise. Why not dig another well? It was not the voice of an elder, nor a man, nor even a grown woman. It was Zuri, the 12-year-old daughter of a poor farmer. She stood barefoot in the dust, her small frame almost swallowed by the crowd, but her words carried with surprising clarity. Heads turned. For a moment, silence stretched across the circle. Then came the laughter. The elders threw back their heads, mocking. "A child speaks among us," one scoffed. "And a girl, no less," another added, shaking his head. "What does she know of wells or water? Go back to your chores." Their laughter spread among the men like fire, a cruel sound meant to stamp out her courage. Some of the women lowered their eyes, wishing to shield her from the ridicule, while others dared to let the hint of a smile cross their faces, as if secretly proud of her boldness. Zuri's father, standing behind her, flushed with embarrassment. He gripped her wrist and pulled her back roughly. "Quiet, child," he hissed under his breath. "This is not your place. You shame us all." Zuri lowered her eyes, but her heart beat like a drum. She had spoken truth. She had seen the problem clearly, even if they refused to hear it. The narrator's voice cuts in, deep and resonant, as the camera lingers on Zuri's face, dusty, young, but already fierce. In a village where women were silent, and poverty silenced the poor even more, one girl dared to speak. They said she couldn't lead, but her voice was only beginning. The camera drifts away from the noisy council beneath the baobab tree, and the narration softens, pulling us back into the life of the girl whose voice had dared to break the silence. Zuri was born in a mud-walled hut on the far edge of the village, where her father tilled a small patch of land that yielded barely enough to fill their bowls. Poverty was the soil of her childhood, and hardship grew around her like weeds that never ceased. She rose before the sun, her thin arms lifting bundles of firewood twice her size, her bare feet padding over thorns and stones as she followed her mother to the riverbank to fetch water. The clay pot on her head seemed heavier each day, though she learned to balance it with quiet strength, her body still straight even when her spirit bent under the weight of labor. Her brothers lived differently. They ran through the fields in play, their laughter chasing one another while she bent low in the rows of millet, her fingers raw from pulling weeds. When the men of the family rested in the shade, Zuri still worked beside her mother, grinding grain on the stone slab until her arms ached. In the evenings, she would often find herself gazing at her brothers, their feet swinging freely as they talked of hunting, wrestling, and dreams of becoming men. She loved them, but in their freedom she saw the cruel line drawn by tradition, one that allowed boys to roam and denied girls the same sky. Yet where others saw silence, Zuri found listening. While she labored at her chores, her ears opened wide to the rhythm of the elders' voices. She absorbed their tales of ancestors, of battles and famines, of spirits and justice. The wisdom that passed through fireside stories became her secret inheritance. When others mocked her for being too curious, she memorized each word, replaying them in whispers as she carried wood or stirred the cooking pot. Sometimes, when she was alone in the field, she imitated the elders' tones, mimicking their gestures, speaking to the stalks of millet as though they were a council. In those moments, the girl who carried the weight of poverty felt, if only for a breath, like a leader. Education was her greatest hunger, sharper than any pang of the stomach. She would linger by the schoolhouse, where the children of wealthier families sat inside with slates and chalk. Through the cracks in the walls, she caught fragments of lessons, repeating numbers under her breath, scribbling shapes in the dirt with a stick. She learned not by books, but by scraps, not by invitation, but by stolen glances and overheard words. Her eyes followed every chalk mark, her ears caught every syllable, and slowly she began to weave an education out of what others would call nothing. Zuri's gift did not remain hidden. She began to gather the younger children of the village, the ones too little for chores or too poor for school. Under the shade of trees or by the edge of fields, she told them stories she had heard from the elders, stories she had stitched together with her own imagination. Her voice carried with surprising strength, rising and falling with emotion, commanding attention even from restless children. She taught them little songs that carried lessons, clapping rhythms that made them laugh, weaving wisdom into play. The little ones adored her, and even mothers noticed the way their children came home repeating Zuri's words. But admiration was shallow and fleeting. To the community, she was still nothing more than a farmer's daughter, a girl born into poverty, destined for silence. When she lingered too long near the school, she was chased away with harsh words. When she tried to share ideas among adults, her father reminded her of her place with a stern look. Even when mothers whispered that their children loved her stories, they still dismissed her as just a child, incapable of more. The narrator's voice deepens as the screen shows Zuri balancing firewood on her head, her thin figure silhouetted against the setting sun, while her brothers laugh in the distance. Her voice was powerful, the narrator explains, but the world around her was blind to it. They saw only a barefoot girl, weighed down by poverty, a farmer's daughter with nothing to give. Yet within her, a storm was gathering, one that no laughter, no dismissal, could silence forever. The land itself seemed to groan under the weight of the sun. Days stretched into weeks without rain, and the sky remained a merciless sheet of blue. The earth cracked open like broken pottery, each fissure spreading wider as the ground grew thirstier. Fields that once swayed with green stalks of millet and maize now stood brittle, their leaves curling and yellow. Goats and cattle pressed their muzzles to the dry soil where grass had once grown, their ribs showing, their cries weak. Each morning, women lined the narrow path to the village well, balancing clay pots, some carrying infants on their backs, others clutching older children by the hand. The line snaked farther each day, the pots clinking together like hollow drums of despair. Inside the council circle, beneath the ancient baobab tree, the elders' voices rose again, sharper this time, their arguments fueled by hunger and fear. One insisted the young men must walk miles to the river, though many remembered the dangers of that path, wild animals, bandits, and thirst itself. Another declared the ancestors were angry, that a sacrifice was needed to appease them. Yet another argued the well belonged first to the council families, that others should wait or go without. Their words clashed like storm winds, but offered no rain. The villagers gathered close, watching, whispering, waiting for a decision that never seemed to come. Mothers wiped the sweat from their brows as their children tugged at their skirts, whining for water. Men stood in restless silence, arms crossed, their faces set in stone. Into this storm of words and despair, a voice rose again, trembling but determined. "Why don't we dig a second well?" It was Zuri, the same child who had spoken once before. She stood at the edge of the circle, her small hands clutching the hem of her worn dress. Her voice carried just enough to be heard, slicing through the bickering of the men. Heads turned sharply. The elders froze, stunned at the audacity. The silence lasted only a breath before it broke into harsh rebuke. "You again," one elder spat, his eyes narrowing. "Did your father not teach you respect?" Another slammed his staff into the ground. A child interrupts the council once more. "And a girl? Have you no shame?" The words came like blows, each one meant to push her back into silence. Murmurs spread among the villagers, some disapproving, others curious, but no one dared defend her. Her father's face burned red with humiliation. He strode forward, gripping her arm tightly, his voice low and sharp. "Zuri, enough." He pulled her behind him, bowing his head toward the elders. "Forgive her, she does not know her place." His hand squeezed her wrist, the pressure of shame stronger than any physical pain. The elders turned their attention back to themselves, dismissing her as though she were nothing more than a passing breeze. The laughter was gone this time, replaced by irritation, by anger at being challenged, by fear of change whispered through a child's mouth. They continued their arguments, louder now, desperate to bury her words beneath their own. Zuri lowered her eyes, but inside her heart was a storm. Humiliation burned in her chest, but beneath it was fire. She had seen the suffering with her own eyes, the cracked earth, the thirsty animals, the endless line at the well. Her suggestion was not foolish. It was simple, practical, needed. But the elders were too proud, too bound by their traditions, to listen. She bit her lip, holding back tears, not because she was hurt by their mockery, but because she was angry. Angry that her voice, though true, was silenced simply because it came from her. The camera lingers on her face, her jaw set, her eyes fixed on the well in the distance. The narrator's voice cuts in, steady and reflective, carrying weight beyond the moment. They laughed at her words, but she had spoken sense. Deep down, the village knew it. Though no one would admit it, her question lingered in their hearts like a seed buried in dry soil, waiting for rain. Around her, life carried on. The elders continued to bicker, the villagers returned to their struggles, the women fetched their meager pots of water. But whispers began, faint and quiet. Some women remembered the girl's words as they walked home with heavy loads. Some men thought of it in the fields, glancing at the parched ground. They did not speak it aloud, but the idea had taken root, fragile yet alive. Zuri walked behind her father, her arms still sore from his grip. He scolded her in a hushed voice as they moved away from the council. "You shame me, child. Do not speak out again. These matters are for men, for elders. Not for you. Never for you." His words weighed heavy, but her spirit did not bend. She knew she had spoken truth, and though no one admitted it, she could feel it had settled in the hearts of others. The screen fades to the dry earth once more, the cracks spreading wider, the crops wilting further. The drought deepened, and the arguments continued, but something had shifted. A girl's voice had broken through twice. Mocked, silenced, punished, but not forgotten. And in silence, seeds wait for rain. The sun dipped low behind the baobab tree, painting the horizon in streaks of orange and gold. When the village slept, when the arguments of the elders had quieted and the chatter of daily labor faded, Zuri found her own voice in the shadows. Alone beneath the ancient tree, she stood before the gnarled roots as though they were a council of chiefs, lifting her chin and speaking with a power that belied her age. Her arms moved as she had seen the elders do, her words rolling like waves, rehearsed again and again until even the night birds tilted their heads as if listening. She practiced speeches no one had asked her to give, stories no one had given her permission to tell. She spoke not only for herself, but for the dreams she carried in silence. In the fields, while tending her family's goats, she whispered to them as though they were an audience. "What will become of us when the well runs dry? Who will speak when the elders cannot agree?" she asked, her voice rising and falling, the goats chewing grass unbothered, their ears twitching at the sound. Sometimes she laughed at herself, but other times she grew solemn, imagining the faces of her people before her. It was a secret game, but it sharpened her gift. She found companionship in song, gathering other girls when chores were done. They clapped their hands, sang rhythms that carried hope, and wove words of courage into melodies. "Together we are strong," they sang softly, "together we endure." It was not defiance spoken loudly, it was strength whispered into the hearts of those who had long been silent. Slowly, women and children began to linger when Zuri gathered. She told them tales of justice learned from elders but reshaped in her own voice. She spoke of fairness, of listening, of standing as one. What began as a child's pastime grew into quiet gatherings, like small flames flickering in the dark. But as Zuri's secret influence grew, so too did the troubles pressing down on the village. One day, a government official arrived, his soldiers trailing behind him. He demanded new taxes, heavier than before, insisting that every family pay in grain, livestock, or coin. The farmers protested that the drought had already stripped them bare, but their voices shook with fear. The official sneered, his threats clear: pay or suffer worse. In another corner of the community, old tensions between two clans reignited. A quarrel over a boundary turned violent, and whispers of bloodshed began to spread. Once again, the elders gathered beneath the baobab tree, and once again their voices rose in endless debate. Some urged submission to the official, others warned of rebellion, while others still argued that the feud between clans mattered more than taxes. Their words circled like vultures above carrion, plenty of noise, but no movement forward. Villagers went home heavy with despair, no closer to answers. It was in these restless nights that people began turning to Zuri. A mother, tired of watching her children go hungry, asked her, "Child, what do you think we should do?" A young man, frustrated by the council's bickering, sought her by the fields and whispered, "Tell me, Zuri, what would you say if you were allowed to speak?" At first she was startled, unsure if her words should leave the shadows, but gradually she answered. She reminded them of unity, of courage, of the power of standing together. She urged patience but also strength, teaching that silence was not the same as acceptance. The whispers spread. More and more villagers came quietly, under the veil of night or in the spaces between chores. They listened to her stories, repeated her songs, and found strength in her courage. She was still mocked in public, still silenced by the elders, but in private, her words began to grow roots. She was no longer just the girl who interrupted the council. She was the one people trusted when their leaders failed them. The narrator's voice returns as the camera lingers on Zuri seated among women and children, her face lit by firelight, her hands gesturing as she spoke with conviction. The village began to change, not in the council's circle, but in the quiet places where truth was whispered. To the elders, she remained the girl who spoke out of turn. But to the people, she was no longer dismissed. They began to see her not as the child who talked too much, but as the girl who spoke sense. The scene fades to show the official soldiers collecting grain from unwilling farmers, the clans sharpening their spears, and the elders still arguing under the baobab. Then, it cuts back to Zuri, standing among her people, her voice low but steady, her presence unshaken. The world had not yet recognized her, but the tide was turning. The drought had sharpened its claws until there was almost nothing left to take. The once fertile fields stood barren, their soil cracked like broken skin. The granaries were nearly empty, and what little food remained was fiercely guarded. Mothers hushed their children's cries of hunger, their lullabies carrying no promise of tomorrow's meal. The feud between the two clans had flared into open hostility, spears flashing, insults shouted across borders. The soldiers of the official loomed like vultures, waiting for the right moment to descend and collect what the famine had not already stolen. It was a season of despair, and the air itself seemed heavy with the weight of it. The villagers gathered again beneath the baobab tree, their faces gaunt, their eyes weary. The elders sat in their circle, staffs in hand, robes draped around thin shoulders, but this time their voices faltered. They had argued so many times before, offered so many excuses, that even they had run out of words. The silence of their failure pressed down on the crowd like a shroud. People shifted uncomfortably, murmurs rippling through the assembly. Children clung to their mothers, wide-eyed, as if sensing that even the protectors of tradition had no answer left to give. Into that silence stepped Zuri. She did not creep from the edges this time, did not whisper her words in secret or hide behind her father. She walked to the center of the circle, her bare feet raising small puffs of dust, her posture straight, her head high. She was still the daughter of a poor farmer, dressed in a simple faded dress, but something about her presence drew every eye. She stood before the elders as though she belonged there, though no one had ever said she did. Her voice rose, steady and clear, carrying across the tense gathering. "We have waited long enough for answers that never come. We cannot live on arguments. We cannot drink silence. We cannot feed our children with excuses. Her words struck the air like a drumbeat, sharp and unrelenting. The elders stiffened, their mouths opening to scold her, but she did not pause. Her words moved like a river that could not be stopped. We fight among ourselves while our land dies. We fear outsiders while our children starve inside our own homes. We let pride guide us while our people waste away. But I tell you now, unity is stronger than pride. Courage is stronger than fear. If we stand together, we can face the drought, we can resist injustice, and we can heal the wounds we have made against one another. The camera moves over the faces in the crowd, the women's eyes widening, children leaning forward, men shifting uncertainly. Something in her tone carried weight that no elder's staff could summon. It was not the voice of authority born of age or wealth, but the voice of truth born of suffering, of someone who had lived the same hunger, the same thirst, the same despair. Her father stood at the edge of the circle, torn between shame and awe. He had told her to be silent, to know her place, but here she was, speaking words he himself wished he could have spoken. He could not bring himself to drag her away. Zuri raised her hand, small but commanding. The well is failing, but we are not. The land is dry, but we are not yet broken. Dig another well. Share what we have left fairly, without greed, without division. And if officials come to take from us, we will face them together, as one village, not as clans, not as rich and poor, not as men and women, but as one. The crowd murmured, louder this time, their voices rising like a tide. The camera shows mothers nodding, their lips pressed tight but their eyes bright with hope. Children smile faintly, sensing the spark of something new. The young men exchange glances, some already straightening their shoulders as if ready to follow her. The elders sat frozen, their mouths closed. For once, they had no words. They could not laugh because laughter would not silence her now. They could not scold because the crowd was listening. Their silence became the measure of her victory. Zuri's voice grew stronger, her rhythm becoming the heartbeat of the moment. You say I am only a girl, only a farmer's daughter. But what am I if not the same blood and earth that you are? Do we not all drink the same water? Do we not all eat from the same soil? Then why should my voice be less than yours? If truth can come from the lips of a child, then let it be heard. If courage can come from the heart of a poor girl, then let it guide us. For what matters is not who speaks, but whether the words can save us. The words rolled out like thunder, and the people responded. A murmur turned into cheers, cheers into chants, voices rising in unison around her. Zuri! 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 Her name, once dismissed, now echoed in the air like a drumbeat of change. The chants shook the baobab tree itself, a chorus of voices declaring that a leader had risen from the least expected place. The narrator's voice deepens, filling the screen with weight as the chants continue. The daughter of a poor farmer had become the voice of a people. Where the council fell silent, her words rang out. Where tradition had closed its ears, the truth forced them open. And in that moment, the village knew, leadership is not given, it is claimed, by those brave enough to speak when silence has failed. The camera closes on Zuri's face, lit by the fire of conviction, her young eyes fierce yet filled with hope. Around her, the villagers stand taller, the despair of moments ago transformed into determination. It is the climax, the turning point, when the powerless rise behind the one voice that dared to break the silence. The dust of conflict slowly settled, and in its place came the sound of hands at work. Where once villagers had gathered only to argue, now they gathered with tools, baskets, and sweat. Men and women, young and old, dug side by side into the earth, guided not by orders from the elders but by the voice that had awakened their courage. The camera sweeps across the scene, calloused hands gripping wooden handles, children carrying small stones, laughter breaking through the silence that once hung heavy. For the first time in months, hope felt louder than hunger. The well grew deeper each day, a wound in the earth that promised healing. And when the first gush of water broke free, sparkling in the sunlight, the village erupted in cheers. Women filled their pots without fear of quarrel, men splashed cool water on their dusty faces, Children danced barefoot in the mud forming around the stream. It was more than water. It was proof that together, they could build what they needed. But the changes did not stop there. What began with one well soon spread into the fabric of the village itself. The women who once stood silently behind their husbands now began to sit near the councils, their voices weaving into the discussions. At first, the elders resisted, shifting uncomfortably, but the tide of unity was too strong. Soon, they found themselves listening to mothers who knew the weight of feeding families, to widows who had endured hardship with quiet strength. Their wisdom, once ignored, became part of every decision. Children, too, found their world transformed. The camera lingers on a group of them seated under a tree, chalk scratching against makeshift boards, as an elder teaches them letters. Among them sits Zuri, her face glowing with pride as she helps the smaller ones pronounce words. Education, once a dream for the privileged few, began to take root in the soil of possibility. Parents who once dismissed learning as a luxury now saw it as the tool their children needed to break the chains of poverty. Food, though still scarce, was shared more fairly. No family was left to starve in silence, for the memory of division was too fresh. Farmers began to trade seeds, women cooked communally, and when harvests returned, the joy was spread across every household. The camera moves through homes filled with the smell of shared meals, voices rising in songs of gratitude instead of quarrels of resentment. At the heart of it all was Zuri. She did not sit on a throne or command from above. She walked among her people, listening more than she spoke, lifting others so they too could lead. Her leadership was not marked by power but by service. When the women sang in the evenings, she was there, clapping and laughing. When the men built new irrigation channels, she was there, carrying stones on her small back. When children stumbled over their lessons, she was there, kneeling to guide them patiently. She did not rule, she inspired. Her father, once ashamed of her boldness, now walked proudly at her side. He carried no riches, but his chest rose with dignity. He was known not only as a farmer but as the father of the girl who had united a village. And though he had once silenced her, now he was the first to urge others to listen when she spoke. His pride shone in the way he watched her, no longer fearful of tradition but grateful for the daughter who had given them all a future. The narrator's voice softens, carrying the weight of the lesson. They had said a poor farmer's daughter could not lead. They had laughed, silenced, and shamed her. But the truth is not bound by wealth, nor by gender, nor by age. True leadership is born from courage, and courage knows no boundaries. Zuri became more than a leader. She became the heart of her community, the voice that spoke when silence had failed, the hope that rose when despair seemed final. The final images unfold slowly, villagers sharing a meal under the shade of the baobab tree, children running freely with laughter, women standing confidently in circles of discussion, and Zuri gazing at the horizon with determination in her eyes. The baobab, once the silent witness of arguments, now stands tall as the witness of unity. The narrator closes with a voice both steady and warm. From the cracked earth of drought to the flowing water of a new well, from silence to song, from shame to pride, her journey reminds us all, never underestimate the power of a single voice. For sometimes, the one voice everyone ignores is the one that changes everything. The screen fades to black, the chants of the villagers echoing one last time, not as noise but as a promise that the story of Zuri will live on in every heart that dares to speak against silence. The camera opens on a sweeping shot of the village at dawn. The golden light spills over fields that once lay cracked and barren, now alive with green shoots of new crops. Smoke rises gently from clay hearths, carrying the scent of morning meals. Children's laughter echoes in the background, no longer weighed down by hunger or thirst. Women walk freely with pots balanced on their heads, not in desperate lines at a single well but moving toward multiple streams of water their community had carved from the earth together. The baobab tree, once the silent stage for quarrels and dismissals, now stands as a monument to transformation. Beneath its wide arms, the council no longer belongs only to the elders. Circles of men and women sit together, speaking, listening, debating, not as rivals but as partners. Their voices carry harmony instead of discord, unity instead of division. The camera lingers on faces, weathered by hardship yet softened by the pride of survival and progress. We see Zuri walking through the marketplace, no longer the barefoot girl tugged away in shame. She still wears simple clothes, her feet still dusty from the soil, but she carries herself differently. Children run to her, calling her name, clinging to her hands. Women smile knowingly, nodding as she passes, while men, once dismissive, step aside in quiet respect. Zuri greets them all, not as a ruler above them but as one of their own, a leader who had always walked with them. Her father appears at her side, shoulders squared, his face lined with years of toil yet glowing with dignity. The shame that once bent his back has vanished. He is proud, not only of his daughter but of the village that now knows her worth. His voice joins the narrators in silence, saying nothing but speaking everything through the pride in his eyes. The camera captures final images of progress. Children bent over slates, scratching out letters beneath the shade of trees, women exchanging seeds with laughter, planning future harvests, men and youths working together to raise new shelters and protect the land from drought. Everywhere, there is life, there is resilience, there is the pulse of a community reborn. The narrator's voice deepens, carrying the weight of a lesson bigger than one story. Leadership is not born of wealth. It does not come from titles, nor from the power of birthright. True leadership rises from courage, from truth, from the willingness to speak when silence is easier. Zuri's voice began as a whisper in the shadow of tradition. It was mocked, silenced, and pushed aside. But courage cannot be buried. Truth cannot be drowned. One voice, steady and unbroken, grew into a call that united many. The camera pans upward, from the bustling village to the vast skies stretched endlessly above. The horizon glows, a symbol of the future yet to come. The narrator delivers the final line with a quiet force, each word striking like a drumbeat of hope. They said a poor farmer's daughter couldn't lead, but her voice carried an entire village into a new future. The screen fades to black, leaving only the echo of her story, an invitation to remember, to believe, and to never underestimate the power of a single voice.